Welcome to Chapter 6. This chapter is going to be over the integumentary system. This is the first organ system we're going to look at in depth. We'll continue this into the muscular system, skeletal system, and nervous system. But right now we're going to talk about the covering that surrounds all of the organ systems. Have you ever heard of the Body World exhibit? If you ever get a chance to see it, I highly recommend it. This exhibit takes bodies and actually converts them into a plastic-like substance that allows you to manipulate them and move them into different positions. And in the case of this picture, actually remove the entire integument or skin from a body. He's holding up his own skin. It's a little creepy, but very interesting if you ever get the chance. Skin is pretty amazing. We think about it a lot. If we ask a question, what is skin? We're studying anatomy. If we ask the question, what does it do? We're studying physiology. If we ask, what is it made of? We're looking at histology. Where does it come from? Embryology. And what's going wrong? Why do I have so much acne? That's pathology. So we're always looking at our skin, pretty much all the time. The word integument is not a common word nowadays, but if you'd gone back a couple of 100 years, that wouldn't be a weird one to use. It means a tough outer protective layer, a covering. They might even use it for something like a jacket. The skin is an organ consisting of an epithelium overlying a thick layer of connective tissue, rich with blood vessels and accessory structures such as glands. In our case, skin is going to be the body's largest organ. It comes in at about 16% of your body weight is just your skin. That means that on average, you're carrying around 20 pounds of skin. That's quite a bit for such a thin structure. Here's a picture showing us our skin in cross-section. Up at the top, we see some hairs and the upper epidermis. Below that is the dermis, where we have a lot of these structures like our hair follicles and our glands located. And below that, we see a nice network of blood vessels and some subcutaneous fat in the hypodermis. The layers are called the epidermis layer, where we see stratified squamous epithelium, the dermis layer, which has dense, irregular connective tissue, the hypodermis or subcutaneous layer, where we see areolar and adipose connective tissue, and it's not actually a part of the integumentary system. They're grouped together because in a cross-section they go together, but in reality, the actual integument is just that epidermis and dermis. Functions of the integument include protecting the underlying tissue and organs. Without your integument, all of the muscle and tissue beneath it would be exposed to the surface, where very quickly you would dehydrate, you would damage it by rubbing it on stuff. It wouldn't go so well. Your skin also excretes salt, water, and organic waste via the glands. It maintains your body temperature through insulation and evaporation. It synthesizes vitamin D3. And because of all of the nerves traveling through the epidermis and the dermis, it's really good at detecting touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. There's a lot of functions to this very impressive integument. This slide is a summary of what we will be learning over the coming slides. We're going to take those layers of the epidermis and we're going to break them down into their individual layers. They all start with the word stratum. So you see stratum corneum is the top one, stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basale. We're going to break those down one by one. Here we see a microscope slide of thick skin versus thin skin. Do you remember that from our model? Thick skin is found on the palm of your hands and the sole of your feet. it has a much taller layer of that stratum corneum. In comparison, on the right we see thin skin, which the stratum corneum is just this very tiny wafer-thin layer on top. Based on that, do you think this slide is thick skin or thin skin? You are correct if you chose thick skin. Look at how deep the stratum corneum is, that top layer. This is the layer of all of those dead skin cells that can flake off, so we want to have it nice and thick so as we shed them, we're still producing new ones and pushing it up from underneath. Underneath is that basement membrane way at the bottom, the stratum basale. This picture breaks it down into a very nice visual way where we color-coded everything. Up at the top, you see that stratum corneum is shown in pink. Here we see the dead cells that are going to be sloughing off. All that dust you find around your house might actually be your own stratum corneum cells. The next one down is the stratum lucidum. This layer will be present in thick skin only. Then stratum granulosum. These are cells that have started dying and they're gathering all these granules into them. The majority of the cells in this epidermis will be the stratum spinosum. These cells begin to take on a slightly spiny appearance as they work their way through the epidermis. At the very bottom is the stratum basale. This is our layer where the cells are actually dividing and multiplying, and as they divide, they push the cells upward. Here's a slide specifically on the stratum basale of the epidermis. This is the deepest epidermal layer. It's a single layer of cuboidal or low columnar cells tightly attached to the underlying basement membrane. It contains 3 types of cells: the keratinocytes, melanocytes, and tactile cells. Keratinocytes are the main cell type of the epidermis. The picture that we saw where we saw the entire epidermis was basically all keratinocytes. New cells are produced in the stratum basale layer, the very bottom, by division, and they are pushed upward, eventually becoming dead, hard, keratinized cells at the top layer of skin. Keratin is used to strengthen and waterproof the skin. The cells start off as basal, then they become spinous, they start taking in granules, and then they become hard, cornified, almost like cornflakes at the very top. Also located in the stratum basale layer are tactile cells. These are cells that are sensitive to touch and attached to sensory nerve endings. It's shown here in yellow on our picture. When these cells get compressed, say you touch something and it compresses that part of the skin, it compresses these and stimulates the nerves, which carry a signal back to the brain. These allow for fine sense detail. So if I'm running my hands over something that looks smooth, but I detect a little bit of bumps, that's going to be these tactile cells. They give you that information about the surface you're touching. Melanocytes are a cell that produces and stores melanin pigment, then transfers it into the surrounding keratinocytes. This acts to protect us from UV radiation. In this picture, the stratum basale layer has a melanocyte nestled right there in the middle of all those basal cells. And here you can see it's producing these little dark specks, which it's pushing off into the surrounding cells. As those cells move upward through the layers, they carry with them those little pigments of melanin. The more pigment a cell takes on, the darker the skin color of the person. The number of melanocytes is almost the same for all people. What varies is the amount and type of melanin produced. Demographic studies have shown that living in areas where skin cancer is a much higher rate due to the strong sunlight that comes in, those people tend to produce much more melanin to protect them against the UV. Areas that do not have as much sunlight, talking about Europe, for example, they tend to have a lighter skin tone because that's not as necessary due to, in part, the fact that you're going to be spending much more of your time indoors due to the cold weather and the lack of as much direct sunlight. Skin color can also change for a couple of other reasons. Melanin is what gives skin black, brown, tan, or yellow shades. This is controlled by genetics, and sun can determine the degree of shade, darkening it up a little bit. As you get more sunlight and more UV radiation, your body responds by increasing the amount of melanin that's produced, causing the skin to darken. Skin can also take on a reddish color, for example, whenever someone blushes or they have a rash. What you are seeing is all of the capillaries underneath your skin are filling up with that bright red oxygenated blood. You're actually seeing that color change due to the hemoglobin. If you are very cold and your fingers start turning blue, it's because your body is constricting how much blood is flowing to those fingertips. It might be better for the body to keep more of the blood in the abdomen between your brain and your heart. So the areas that have lost a lot of that blood will start to turn a bluish color. Have you ever heard the myth that if you eat too many carrots, you might turn orange? Well, there's some truth to that. It requires a lot of carrots, so maybe if you eat a couple a day every day for over a month, we might see a color change in you. Keratin is a yellow or orange plant pigment, and you receive it from your food, like carrots, and it can accumulate in your skin cells. Keratinemia is increasing that number to the point where you have that yellow or orange appearance. A good example is the hands you see here. One person has keratinemia, the other person is normal. At the bottom, these cells are pretty good. They're nice and full of liquid. They have a good cytoplasm. But as they move upward through the layers, they are further and further away from the nutrient-rich blood cells that are below the basement membrane. They begin to take on a spiny appearance as their volume shrinks, but their connections to the other cells are still there, those desmosomes. It ends up giving them a spiny appearance as they stretch at those connections but shrink overall. The spinosum is also the site of dendritic or Langerhans cells. These are immune cells that help fight infection. We see one in our picture kind of squished up in the middle there. It travels in between the different layers of the skin. Having these immune cells located in our skin means they are there able to instantly respond if a cut were to happen or bacteria were to enter the skin. The cells, as they got pushed upwards, got further and further away from the blood vessels at the bottom. In this layer, the dying cells are filled with keratin granules, resulting in cell death as they move into the upper layers. Basically, they become little dead flat pancakes full of keratin. The stratum lucidum layer is a clear layer that is only seen on the thick skin. It's very thin. It's only 2 to 3 cells thick, and we only see it on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. It's believed to be there to give us a little bit of a waterproof effect to our palm and our soles. We've finally reached the stratum corneum, the uppermost layer. It's a thick, stratified layer of keratinized anucleate cells. These cells have died and lost their nucleus and their other organelles. They didn't need them anymore because they were dying. So the nucleus is gone. It's just full of those keratin granules, and this flat pancake forms that upper epidermis. Because the cells are just squashed on top of each other so tightly, it provides an excellent barrier to keep out bacteria and different substances, anything we don't want to come in. Let's look at a summary of the epidermis. On the left, we see an actual picture of our skin, a cross section, and on the right, we see an artist's version of it. Going from the bottom, we see the dermis is below, the stratum basale, where the cells replicate and grow, the stratum spinosum, where they get pushed up into it, begin to take on the spiny appearance, the stratum granulosum, where they fill with the granules and die, the stratum lucidum, that clear layer that's present in thick skin, and the stratum corneum, the top epidermis. The stratum corneum, the uppermost layer. An epidermal imbalance that we can sometimes see is called psoriasis. It's an overproduction of skin cells. In a normal individual, these skin cell cycles might take a month or so to get from the stratum basale layer to replicate into the spinosum, work its way up into the granulosum, and finally the corneum. But when someone has psoriasis, this cycle takes days, just overproducing these skin cells. It's due to a chronic autoimmune disorder, and it develops into patches of scaly skin. We see a picture here on the left where this has just continually been producing these skin cells. In the microscope slide on the right, you're able to see that it looks rather disorganized compared to the last slide we just looked at. The dermis is coming up into it, and the actual layer of all the spinosum is much thicker. We're just overproducing these cells. We're cranking them out.